Namaste all and welcome to our continuing series on the synthesis of yoga with our beloved Ranga. We are on page 198,
198.
beginning with the sentence, "For long after the individual has become partially free."
Yeah. Okay, so I start reading the para. For long after the individual has become partially free, a moral organism capable of conscious growth, aware of an inward life, eager for spiritual progress, society continues to be external in its methods. A material and economic organism, mechanical, more intent upon status and self-preservation than on growth and self-perfection. The greatest present triumph of the thinking and progressive individual over the instinctive and static society has been the power he has acquired by his thought will to compel it to think also, to open itself to the idea of social justice and righteousness, communal sympathy, and mutual compassion, to feel after the rule of reason rather than blind custom as a test of its institutions, and to look on the mental and moral ascent of its individuals as at least one essential element in the validity of its laws. Ideally, at least, to consider light rather than force as its sanction, moral development and not vengeance or restraint as the object even of its penal action is becoming just possible for the communal mind. The greatest future triumph of the thinker will come when he can persuade the individual integer and the collective whole to rest their life relation and its union and stability upon a free and harmonious consent and self-adaptation, and shape and govern the external by the internal truth, rather than to constrain the inner spirit by the tyranny of the external form and structure. Okay, so what is, you remember the chapter is the standards of conduct and spiritual freedom. And Sri Ranga has given 4 standards in a very general way. Okay, there are any number of standards if you go into detail, but the first standard is that of the ego. When man is undeveloped, okay, he needs his ego and he needs his motives of action. Unless he has motives of action and ego, he will not be able to progress. If his desires, it is his desires that force him to act. Okay? So the material world is built upon matter, and matter's the main characteristic of matter is stability, non-movement. So when life comes up, okay, it introduces energy so that the sleeping character of matter awakes and starts moving. And there you need motive. Okay, ego is not that much still there, but motives are required. So that is it. The first law of society is what you need, your needs and your necessities, you fulfill. That's what actually happens at the animal level. Okay, so that's the first level. The second level is where society intervenes, because if there is everybody is following his own ego and his own desires, there will be clash and there will be disharmony. I may want something and somebody else may want something else. So society steps in and makes some laws. Okay, everybody has to obey those laws. So that's a social standard. Society insists on its members sticking to certain rules. That's the second one. Then the third one is there. And the third one is when morality comes into the picture. So this is what he is describing now, when man awakes and starts realizing that social laws are very mechanical and you need to have a morality. The value of moral conduct comes into the picture. That's what he is describing in this paragraph. Okay, so I now read each sentence and we'll see. Or I can do one thing, if Narad approves, I can read the summary and we can go on to the next one.
Good idea.
Okay, I'll do that. So, now what Sembhi is saying in this paragraph. Even long after the individual has gone ahead in the development of his consciousness, society still remains only in the general and vague acceptance of moral principles without any sure application in actual day-to-day life. And even if application is attempted, it is most partially and half-heartedly practiced. Society largely continues to dwell in the superficial nature, stuck on the ideas of material progress and economic progress rather than inner growth and self-perfection. But it can be said that the thinker's greatest success has been to compel society to think likewise rather than to live on in a static and instinctively mechanical manner. Society starts to become more and more open and receptive to the ideals of social justice and righteousness, communal sympathy, and mutual compassion. Society begins to live life according to reason rather than to rigid, outdated customs. Ideally, it should consider light rather than force, moral development rather than vengeance, a steady restraint rather than punishment. Now, all these ideas seem to be accepted actively rather than passively. We have seen an even greater success for the thinker and the idealist would be when both individual and the collectivity live in harmony without strife, without each helping the other in an effort to live life according to inner truths rather than outer forms and appearances. What Sridhar is saying is, earlier, we'll take up only one question. Let's say there's a murderer, okay? Society insists that he also should be given complete justice. In other words, if he is murdering somebody else, he also will be hanged, capital punishment. But now Sridhar is saying that rather than vengeance, we should think of compassion. Now, give him a chance to reform himself. Okay? That is one thing. So even we change the laws. Even now, in Europe, for instance, this truth has been accepted and there is no capital punishment. Okay? And in the biggest democracies of the world, America and India, we still have capital punishment. Okay? It is still very much practiced, but it is very much reduced. Only in extreme cases is capital punishment given. So there are two arguments of it. So this is there always a battle between society and the individual. What the individual wants is freedom, but the society does not accept the freedom. He has to conform his behavior to the social standards. So Sridhar is saying now, society is beginning to accept the thinker's ideals of compassion and light rather than punishment. That's what he's saying in the paragraph. So we can go on to the next paragraph.
What was your last word? Light rather than punishment?
Yeah, light rather than, light means more, suppose a criminal is there, let's give him the opportunity to reform himself. That's a more generous attitude towards the individual. So society has to accept that. In some places they've accepted, but in many other places still people insist on. They've had certain cases of murders in India, and the family members insist that the murderer should be punished by capital punishment. So this is the struggle between society and the individual. But slowly things are changing. Not too fast, but the thinking is changing.
But I don't think it's very different in Islam.
Very different from
Islam,
in Islam is not changing.
no.
Islam is not changing at all. For instance, they go to the other extreme. If not only a question of murder, but if you are a thief, your hand will be cut off so that you can't steal anymore. This sort of thing. This is and adultery is punished by not capital punishment, but by stoning to death. So these things still exist. The Sharia law. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Sri Aurobindo says that Islam is a crude religion, which people are realizing now. Many, the more enlightened Muslims are realizing this. And it's fit for the desert people, he says. Sri Aurobindo says that Islam is a crude religion fit for desert people. But they have to reform themselves because they believe in all these things. That's the whole problem. So the reform of Islam has to come from within itself. There are elements in Islam which are very good. For instance, you have to pray, then kindness, all these ideas are there. But the later ideas, they came in vengeance and elimination of those who don't believe in Allah. All these ideas are there. So it's true. It's a battle. Ultimately, I suppose it will happen. So we have to see. I read the next para.
Good.
But even this success that he has gained is rather a thing in potentiality than in actual accomplishment. Exactly what you said. Some religions are still very bent on their own laws. There is always a disharmony and a discord between the moral law in the individual and the law of his needs and desires. Between the moral law proposed to society and the physical and vital needs, desires, customs, prejudices, interests, and passions of the caste, the clan, the religious community, the society, the nation. The moralist erects in vain his absolute ethical standard and calls upon all to be faithful to it without regard to consequences. To him, the needs and desires of the individual are invalid if they are in conflict with the moral law, and the social law has no claims upon him, if it is opposed to his sense of right and denied by his conscience. This is his absolute solution for the individual, that he shall cherish no desires and claims that are not consistent with love, truth, and justice. He demands from the community or nation that it shall hold all things cheap, even its safety and its most pressing interest, in comparison with truth, justice, humanity, and the highest good of all the peoples. Now, Sri says in the next para, he will tell you that it is very impractical. For instance, telling the truth always is not always the best action. Okay. Suppose I give you one very simple example. Suppose in a community, I know that somebody has done wrong. Okay. Suppose I know that somebody has murdered somebody, let's say. I'm taking the worst possible case. And I know who has done it and nobody else knows about it. Should I tell the truth? You are using the truth in the negative way because you want to harm that person who has done that. But if you keep silent, silence is a better option than telling the truth. So the moral ideal of always telling the truth is not necessarily good. Okay. So sometimes silence is better. Sometimes even a lie, small lie, a white lie can be better than telling the truth.
I'm not quite getting your point about the first aspect. If that person tells because he feels it's the right thing to do, not because he's against someone.
Yes. Yeah, so that's okay. That is fitting with a moral law. But if someone feels that I should not harm this man, and although he is a murderer, he can be reformed, and is there not compassion then coming into his judgment?
Yes, but this is in a court of law.
Yeah.
A decision has to be made.
So that's exactly the point. Sridhar is pointing out that the court of law is a social law.
Mm-hmm.
It is not always in conformity with the moral law.
Ah.
That's what he's saying. Okay? So that's what he's saying. And also, absolute truth, okay, and justice is not possible. Absolute justice in the physical world is very rare. There are so many cases who have been put into prison for a crime they did not do. After 40 years, you realize that, oh, he is innocent. So where is the absolute justice? Okay. So this is why you don't have enough sufficient man being imperfect, his judgment also is imperfect. So many times I have seen that the judgment given by a certain judge, okay, later on you see that it was a wrong judgment. So absolute justice is not possible in the physical world, neither is absolute truth possible. Okay. So this is what happens. Now Sridhar will explain in the next paragraph. Okay. So if you want, I'll again summarize this passage.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. Now, Sridhar said that society is slowly awakening to the need of the compassion and light rather than vengeance and penal laws. But this success of the thinker and idealist to force society to submit to its own mind-determined ideals, to its own mentally determined ideals, is only relative. Society may have accepted the ideals, but has not yet practiced them or reached accomplishment. Okay. The third law of ethical behavior keeps clashing with the second law of personal needs and desires. This actually means that the vital and physical needs of the average individual are so strongly entrenched in the outer nature by the past right of persistence that the mind of modern idealism does not have any control over the vital desires. Okay. Even the past customs, prejudices, interests, passions of the caste, the clan, the religious community, the society, the nation are major obstacles for the establishment of morality. I'll give you an example in India, for instance. The Shudra, the lower castes, are not allowed to take water from a well which is being used by the higher castes. So this is an injustice, and it is still the social law is still prevailing over the moral law. That's what I said. The moral idealist is rigid, has no value or need for the second law of personal desires. He says that desires should be absolutely eliminated. It doesn't happen in the world. The moralist, actually rejects the right of the individual for satisfaction of his personal needs. His insistence on absolute morality is inflexible, and he holds all else as cheap and dispensable. Personal needs are dispensable, but not truth, justice, humanitarianism, which are the highest goals of human life. So he is too rigid about these things. Okay, so that's what he said. It does not work out. Now, in the next paragraph, also he will tell you how they are impractical. Moral ideals are not practical. You can't put them into practice. Okay. Now, we can read the next paragraph.
Yes.
No individual rises to these heights of absolute truth, absolute justice, absolute humanity. No individual rises to these heights except in intense moments. No society yet created satisfies this ideal. And in the present state of morality and of human development, none perhaps can or ought to satisfy it. Now that's a fantastic statement, what Sandra is saying. You think?
Those first two sentences,
Yeah,
maybe
we'll go through it. Okay, so or should not be. The first reason is that our moral ideals are themselves, for the most part, ill-evolved, ignorant, and arbitrary mental constructions rather than transcriptions of the eternal truths of the Spirit. Authoritative and dogmatic, they assert certain absolute standards in theory, but in practice, every existing system of ethics proves either in application unworkable or is in fact a constant coming short of the absolute standard to which the ideal pretends. If the ethical system, if our ethical system is a compromise or a makeshift, it gives at once a principle of justification to the further sterilizing compromises which society and the individual hasten to make with it. It's a very interesting thing what he's saying. We'll have a look at with details. And if it insists on absolute love, justice, right, with an uncompromising insistence, it soars above the head of human possibility and is professed with lip homage but ignored in practice. Even it is found that it ignores other elements in humanity which equally insist on survival but refuse to come within the moral formula. For just as the individual law of desire contains within it invaluable elements of the infinite whole, which have to be protected against the tyranny of the absorbing social idea, the innate impulses too, both of individual and of collective man, contain in them invaluable elements which escape the limits of any ethical formula, yet discovered and are yet necessary to the fullness and harmony of the eventual divine perfection. Very interesting para. Again, we do one thing, we'll see the summary of what he's saying, and if necessary, we can discuss some of the aspects of what he's saying.
okay.
The highest ideals of ethics are so high as to be unreachable by the normal man, except in brief periods of exceptional conditions. As to society, it has never established these ideals of justice, righteousness, truth, social harmony. Society has never been able to do this fully. Okay? Justice is very often injustice. Okay? Righteousness is definitely not followed very clearly by society. Truth very often is the very fact that politics is based on falsehood rather than truth. Okay? And so politics is part of the society. So, social harmony. Where is the social harmony between the different communities in a society? It's not there. In every country, it's like that. Every community is only thinking of itself. Since the present condition of human consciousness is so impure and ignorant that any attempt to do so will end up only in a most distorted and undesirable form with negative consequences. The highest ideals of ethics are so high as to be unreachable by the normal man, except in brief periods of exceptional conditions. As to society, it has never established these ideals of justice, righteousness, truth, and social harmony. Since the present condition of human consciousness is so impure and ignorant that any attempt to do so will end up only in the most distorted and undesirable form with negative consequences. Morality, which is only a set of mentally constructed ideals, is most imperfect and arbitrary. These ideals would not even be considered as good transcriptions or fair representations of spiritual truth. Ethical ideals are authoritative, dogmatic, and when put into practice, fail miserably. Secondly, and even if we consider ethical systems to be compromises, then both society and individual hasten to justify their distorting applications in life. I'll give an example of this. And if insistence on absolute truth, justice, harmony is resorted to, then these ideals soar far above the human level and prove to be impracticable. Nobody follows the law of absolute truth. Everybody, even sometimes small lies are always lies are also resorted to. Even if accepted, these ideals are hardly ever practiced seriously. Again, morality itself ignores other elements in perfection, which too refuse to fit into the limited moral framework. Okay. This is very interesting. This discussion, we'll see what it is. This because all the causes of failure of morality, desire, greed, selfishness, indiscipline, and obscurity, elements which are essential for the ultimate perfection. Okay. Now, for instance, desire. You say that desire is bad because you are egoistically trying to get your own desire fulfilled. Desire can change into aspiration. So, in desire, there is a valuable element which has to be encouraged. Take the next one. Okay, selfishness. Okay, develops into a strong insistence on self-growth. So, even selfishness, there is a truth in it. And what is the truth? You want to develop yourself. Okay. Now, greed. Take greed. Turns into pure possession of the integral divine. Indiscipline demands perfect freedom from all binding laws. Okay? Indiscipline should be eliminated. But what happens? Freedom is gone. So these are the things that Samuel is talking about. Okay. There are, if you insist on justice, then love is and compassion is eliminated. But compassion is very necessary. Okay. So, for instance, telling the truth, okay? But sometimes a little flexibility is needed, okay? Because the ideal of understanding others has to come in. So there are many, Srimad himself will explain now, okay? And he says that our ideas are mentally constructed. And if they are mentally constructed, they are imperfect. So they'll never be, they even should not be practiced. Srimad is going so far as to say that. He says they should not even be practiced because our ideas are all not always correct. Okay, so I'll give you one example of what he's saying here. He says, for instance, if we make a compromise, okay, nobody can do absolutely compassion and nobody can tell the truth. So we make a small compromise. Okay? I'll give you one instance. Okay? For instance, when someone is selling, okay, rice or wheat, it should be absolutely pure. It should not be mixed. That's very reasonable, right? It's reasonable. So, but it's not possible because when you are harvesting from there, sometimes all sorts of things will come in. Okay, so it's not always possible. So the government makes a rule that it should be at least 90% pure. Now, the one who is the compromise is being admitted by society, but the criminal will take advantage of it. What he will do is he will add the imperfections of impurities of that 10% which is being allowed. Okay, this is an actual thing that happens. So, for instance, you are selling rice, he will add sand to it. 10% is allowed. Okay, so he will add actually sand and make money. So this sort of thing, that's exactly what Shamli is saying. Compromises also don't work. Okay, so
I have to ask you a question related to Mother and the early Aurovilians.
Okay.
Mother said very clearly to them, if you tell lies I cannot work with you.
Yes. So, but the lie depends more on the attitude of the lie. Okay. Normally, you should not do that. And the necessity of telling a lie, even Swamna does not agree with telling lies. Okay. Certainly not. Even with a good intention, it has got certain vibrations which affect. So, Swamna says in one place, silence is also an option. So, instead of telling the truth which you feel is harmful, keep silent.
Hmm.
But for the ordinary human consciousness, but no, those are not doing yoga, a small white lie is sometimes preferable to a truth which is harmful to others. Okay. As I said, in a community, somebody has done something wrong, and I know that he has done something wrong, and I want to punish him because I don't like him. I'm using the truth for a wrong purpose.
Right. Got it.
Truth has to be used with the right attitude. Okay.
Yes.
So, in Sanskrit, we have a very interesting phrase, okay? Telling the truth, okay, with a bad intention is not right. Okay? Telling the lie with a good intention can be accepted, okay? With a good intention. Okay? So, this is the whole thing. Okay? Also, there is another way of putting it. Tell the truth, but with pleasantness. Don't tell the truth with unpleasantness. If you tell something to somebody with an unpleasant tone, you are not going to succeed. For instance, correcting a child, okay? If you tell this child that what you have done is untruth, but tell him very unpleasantly, he is going to react and he won't listen to you. Okay? And if you tell him with compassion and with a good attitude, he is likely to listen to you.
Hmm.
So that's why it depends more on the attitude with which you are doing this.
Got it. Yes.
But when you are doing yoga, telling a lie is not acceptable. Silence is definitely preferable to telling a lie.
Hmm.
In fact, even law allows it. Even the law allows the criminal to keep silent when the evidence is going to harm him.
Yes, in the U.S., we have the statement, I refuse to answer because it might incriminate me.
That's right.
And that
Exactly.
is called our fifth
Amendment.
amendment, yes.
That's right. Yeah, that's it. So you are given the choice of keeping silent. Okay. So, moreover, absolute love, absolute justice, absolute right reason in their present application by a bewildered and imperfect humanity come easily to be conflicting principles. Justice often demands what love abhors. Okay?
Hmm.
Love and compassion abhor punishment. They don't like punishment. But justice demands punishment. So they are opposites. Okay?
Yes.
Right reason, dispassionately considering the facts of nature and human relations in search of a satisfying norm or rule, is unable to admit without modification either any reign of absolute justice or any reign of absolute love. It doesn't exist in the world. And in fact, man's absolute justice easily turns out to be in practice a sovereign injustice. We gave the examples of those who are imprisoned for a crime they did not do. And 40 years later, you realize that that was a wrong judgment. In fact, man's absolute justice easily turns out to be, in practice, a sovereign injustice. For his mind, one-sided and rigid in its constructions, puts forward a one-sided, partial, and rigorous scheme or figure and claims for it totality and absoluteness and an application that ignores the subtler truth of things and the plasticity of life. Note that, the plasticity of life. all our standards turned into action either waver or waver on a flux of compromises or err by this partiality and unelastic structure.
Hmm.
Humanity sways from one orientation to another. The race moves upon a zigzag led by conflicting claims and on the whole works out instinctively what nature intends, but with much waste and suffering rather than either what it desires or what it holds to be right or what the highest light from above demands from the embodied spirit. So in the record of yoga, Swamdev expands this idea. Okay. For instance, there both are ideal conditions, but they are contradictory. Discipline is very necessary, but when you impose discipline, are you not infringing upon the freedom?
Hmm.
So they are opposites. Freedom and discipline are opposites and both are desirable, but they clash. So how are you going to have absolute love and absolute justice? Not possible. Then let's first another one. Okay. The there are mastery, for instance. Okay. You should be master of yourself, right? Master your own desires and your own nature. You should be in full control of your anger, your jealousy, all these things. You should be in full control. And yet, absolute obedience to the divine is necessary. So you are a slave to the divine. The slavery also there is some element in it which is desirable. Okay, but mastery also is desirable. So these are the opposites which are there. In fact, Srivendra says in the record of yoga, you should have both. You should have the humility, servant, but you must also be master of yourself. So this is so difficult to achieve. But these
Yes.
that is the reason why morality is not applicable. It does not work out in the physical world, but it is certainly superior to the animal behavior. So when you are going, all these standards of conduct are relative. Only the last law is the divine law, which is absolute. But all the other laws are not absolute at all. So, but still they are necessary. That's what is saying. Okay?
So when the race moves upon a zigzag path,
Yes, that's right. Once you are leaning towards this side, once you are leaning towards that side. Take the capital punishment, for instance. Some
Yeah.
have decided that they'll do this. Some are deciding, I can't do that yet. Okay. So there is okay. And then another example I'll give you. Okay. For instance, euthanasia.
yes,
Euthanasia is killing to remove suffering. Right? Someone is suffering very badly and you let him die. Sometimes the doctor even resorts to, they pull out all the supports. The, the, the ventilator, for instance, okay, is disconnected. So you are actually killing someone, but with a good intention. So is euthanasia desirable or not? So humanity is swinging from one level to another level.
what if euthanasia is the decision of the person who is in pain?
Yeah, that's what we are discussing. So, according to justice and the code of medicine, what's called what is it? It's called
Hippocratic law.
That's right. The Hippocratic law. You are contradicting it when you are killing someone.
Yes, yes.
You have the right to save someone, but you have no right to take life because you can't create life. So that's right. So, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that come into the picture. Okay. For instance, someone is suffering. Okay. My uncle is suffering and he has a lot of property. Now, I don't care for my uncle at all, but I go to the doctor and say, Doctor, my uncle is suffering like hell. Okay, why don't you apply euthanasia? But my motive is wrong. My motive is I want his property. So this is the swinging from one side to the other side. Okay, so there are so many. The inner attitude is the most important, not what you are doing externally. So that is the reason what simply saying zigzag path. Go here, go there, or this is what is. Okay, so I think we can stop here today.
Very good session. Thank you, Ranga.
Okay.